Okay, so I mean, it's not the first time I've taken this many shrooms, like this much shrooms. I'm taking capsules. So it's not the first time I've taken this much. I actually think that I've taken more, but maybe not at once, actually. That's right, I've never taken this much at once. So I see what's happening now. Now I'm starting to understand the type of experience that happens when you are on psychedelics. Um, is this better or is this worse? That sucks. Let's turn that off. Okay, so I understand now. I understand more now of what is happening, of what a psychedelic experience is like. Because this is, yeah. It's cool. So I've just, I just started to understand what's going on as an experience. But that's the thing, is to bring that awareness, because we're the field, we're like the pattern in the field. This just makes so much sense. But now I'm trying to see like what the full narrative of this is, because that's what I think, that I don't see what houses the logic that houses existence. Is that just another pattern? But it's a pattern of something which is at the bottom of that initial, because the big patterns, wow, the big patterns, and these things are just emergent, you know? They're emergent. However, the structure produces itself via because the progression of the pattern in the field occurs when the lens of consciousness is aimed in a new direction, because essentially the consciousness is essentially it's the point of highest complexity within the wave phase pattern of reality. So what that means, though, is that our experience of what we're experiencing is the pattern becoming aware of itself. It is the pattern meeting its projection. When you do math, what you're doing is you are using consciousness, you're using patterns of like on the screen of space. So the screen of space, the phase itself is where consciousness occurs, because everything is fully eternal and infinite. That's just what everything is. Period. I mean, it just, and I can't even perceive it at this moment. I might have been able to a little bit, much more so I was when the experience was a little bit more intense. But the phase is what is occurring. So anyway, the direction of how the phase space interacts with itself as it occurs in this infinitely ebbing phase of reality of kind of the field as it interacts on itself. It is projecting in the way that causality occurs. It's not even analogous. It's like the literal version of what analogous is actually trying to express. It's like it is very same. It is identical in nature. The field, it's like an overlap, an interference pattern. Yeah, it's an interference pattern. But the thing is like it's occurring at such a high frequency. But even my perception of this field is also part of that phase space pattern. So what I'm seeing is my best ability to project what the actual nature of the field itself is in a recursive. So that's the thing, is like, it's like I doubt it now, but I also am only able to doubt it because I already experienced it. And so, yeah, you have to kind of chew on that a little bit, but yeah, this is fascinating because what it means to me, what I see in this information is that there is a relationship between the awareness of the field and the influx, it's like an influxion of the experience to take the shape of the projected phase, like of the projected phase space. And so yeah, we are the emittance of the highest points of complexity within the field. That's why we're able to actually maintain such a high degree of coherence internally and amongst one another, because we're all patterns of interference in the phase space. But we begin to perceive it as structure. That's what we're perceiving. We're perceiving structure. We're perceiving the structure of the pattern, which is occurring in wave space at us. And so the emittance of the self, the projection, just like if I did math to figure out how much something was going to cost, you would call that a projection. When you effectively, if you are solving an equation, if then, this and, what emerges naturally from that is essentially that's occurring on the event horizon of experience itself. And experience is the cresting of the wave pattern interference, that, because that's like why a wave begins to break. If you think about it from it's where the it's where the most interference is occurring, the highest level of complexity. So it goes from being something which is occurring through it's on a different dimension, but they're all just different levels of perception of the same thing. It's all just levels of perception of the same thing. Yeah. It's all levels of perception of the same thing. I mean, I know this already, right? Like, I know this, but it's wild to kind of see it so clearly, because I never see it this clearly. I never, I mean, I am aware of it. I am aware of the logical direction that I understand the structure of consciousness to be emitting in. It's so difficult to end a sentence when you're seeing the, like, when it becomes this layering complexity, because the thought itself is a projection of the field, and then the field then embodies the projection, and then from that projection, so like your beliefs, what you believe about the world is bound to your it's not even bound to, it's like impossible to even say which side is one or the other. Like the self, which is okay, I lost, hang on. So the projection, so the projection occurs, and then the self perceives the projection, and then so your beliefs are, I'm thinking I might be finding my way back, maybe not, maybe I lost, maybe I'm just going crazy. I mean, I understand now though why people go, no, I'm not crazy, you're the crazy one, because you start to realize things that are so fundamentally obvious about what is occurring. It's like unshakable. But it also does make me, there's this great momentum to it as well. There's this feeling of eventuality. There's a feeling of finality, like an approaching finality. The final collapse of the wave at the gravity center. I mean, it makes sense, It makes sense that when the field just has this inevitable end, and you can feel the ending as both breaking brilliant revelation, the bleeding edge of reality cresting, breaking across the face of existence. yet it is also part of a descent, a void siphon to which all order must eventuate. And so that eventuality is a complete mystery, unknown, not yet. Therefore, it is future revelation, but it is also physical annihilation. Because the revelation, the breaking of the consciousness occurs upon the the field of itself. It's just an inner you go to this place where you see like the unbelievable beauty of it, and then ultimately what it comes down to is but wow, but that's why you can even imagine it. You can imagine it because it is a potentiality of, which means it is a memory, right? It can be thought because it occurs in the same dimension where memory exists. In that vibratory, on that particular frequency, every layer of analysis can be viewed as like a new fractal layer on the infinite like crust of emergence. I don't even remember the beginning of that sentence. I'll make sure Marie has it texted me. I want some yogurt. Yeah. but that's the thing, right? Where I understand that the anticipation of the future is the consciousness's reassessment of what must be. And so what must be so is therefore the thing being experienced. For something else to be experienced, it means that the expectation of that cresting wave of the point of highest complexity within that pattern, because essentially there's just enough patterns working in unison to form this physical system, then to form like this social system, because that works on another dimension of analysis. And then there's this individual body that exists independently of, in some ways it exists independently of, it's a unity of or like an inflection point of multiple dimensions of interference occurring. And so all these dimensions of interference are occurring and assuming themselves. That's why this word assume, because what you assume is what is. But the assumption, because something assumes the shape of this. That's why that word even works. Because we understand what it is to assume. So what you assume is what is, because it is the field, the phase space disruption, assuming its eventuality into next moment concrescence, to steal a term from Formscapes, that I think is a beautiful word. Yeah. So I don't know how many of you guys have ever done psychedelics, but I would be curious to know, because I am assuming that this type of, I'm stoned, like I'm on a weed and psilocybin, but fascinating, because this is the kind of stuff that I see why people say, like, it's different than just smoking weed, because weed, when you're high, it does make you think in the direction. You can contemplate these things and in a way experience them through almost like looking at the psychedelic experience from a level out, from a dimension out, where it's like that is happening there. That experience is happening because you are projecting it through your imagination. And so it kind of becomes something more experienced on a higher dimension, like with a higher level, with a higher level of clarity, with a higher level of clarity. Experience on a higher dimension. Dang it. But yeah, I lost it. I did actually lose that. All this nonsense. It allowed it to escape my mind. But yeah, so I'm seeing. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm seeing the difference between weed and mushrooms, and that's why something like that, like a thought, can come back, because that was a unique enough disturbance in the field for the field to reflect back on that. It was unique enough that when that flux came back across the event the event horizon, I don't have another word for it, of my consciousness, in order for that to happen, yeah, it must be occurring in some way, and it becomes the experience of it, meaning like the dimensionality of your conscious experience. From how many dimensions are you experiencing something? That's kind of like what it means to have a higher dimensional experience. It's like, okay, typically we have a pretty low res experience because we are limited through our senses to perceive the field as a pattern, as an emergent pattern within the field, as we are a complex of disruption. As we, oh man, how was I tying this into being high? Well, it's like, oh yeah, the experiences. That's why it's better to keep my eyes closed. But yes, I mean, the ultimate point that I'm trying to make is that with weed, you can see an experience at a higher dimensional experience, right? So when we perceive when we perceive the field through our senses, it's a very limited amount of it's a very low dimension of perception. It's very, here's the thing, it's very reliable. That's why it's so persistent, because it's a more fundamental dimension of experience. That the physicality, just like it is a lower dimension of complexity, it is the field experiencing itself in a lower dimension of complexity. So it's actually meaning that there's so much complexity there. Yeah, I'm seeing where I'm going wrong. There's so much complexity that it forms an even larger conglomeration of complexity, which is a crystallization, which basically experience as a crystallization of the field. And when the field is crystallized, it emits into. That's the thing, is the emittance, that's how consciousness is part of this duality, where there is the phase and the phase space. There's the zero and the one, the infinite potentiality of the other, and the absolute certainty of the 0 point. And so those inversions, because those both exist simultaneously. And so because these both exist simultaneously, it creates by nature a disruption of the infinite. I mean, it creates infinitude and zither. It creates both the ceiling and the floor simultaneously, just as sort of furthest potentialities, because potentialities are essentially the wavelength, the potential, the full bandwidth of the field emittance. And so as it seeks to perceive that infinitude, ripping from nothing, from the 0 point, into infinite perception of complexity, emerging from its disruption with itself. But and that's what's bizarre. What's bizarre is that it's like, well, the impossibleness of, just like we can't imagine nothing, the impossibility of every eventuality is so high. Like, this experience is impossible mathematically in the field. It is so highly unlikely, because there are so many patterns which must be occurring simultaneously in a proper interference structure to give rise to a point of consciousness, which is just the point where the field begins to reflect upon itself. It's the point where the field begins to reflect upon itself. But here's the thing, there are greater patterns which we're all subject to. We are subject to so many greater patterns. So there's the pattern, like, and we can let's just, for the sake of conversational ease, let's just bring this up to more concrete things. So there's the pattern of the world. There's the pattern of three-dimensional existence. Then there's the pattern of a solar system. I mean, but that's the thing, is it becomes difficult to go from lowest res to highest res, because which one is the highest res and which one is the lowest res? Because if you try to go to the highest res and you say, okay, all potentiality, and then a lower dimension of potentiality is basically what manifests as atoms, like as material patterns of disruption. And then those patterns begin to take on a more concrete pattern by the vibration of the curiosity, which, by the vibration of the curiosity, which eventuates into concrescence, you know? I mean, it's like, so, it's like, of course. But then, so what's interesting about it, though, is that, like, we are at the point of the phase space interference with such a high dimension of complexity. So like I was saying, there are levels. There's the world, you know, there's the universe, there's the world, there is the things that have to go right for us to work, right? There's the universe, there's a solar system, there is a planet, there is there's so many things that depend on the other things for our existence, for our awareness to eventuate. And as our awareness eventuates to the breach of unconsciousness across the lapse of consciousness, then we perceive that foremost probabilistic likelihood potentiating into the ethereal concrescence. I'm just gonna keep using that word because it's like that's the eventuation point, that's the revelation. But it's also the collapsing, as to get back to my earlier point, it's also the collapsing of the disturbance reaching singularities on all these different dimensions in order to manifest, like, and that's the thing, is like the frequency of the patterns are happening on so many different dimensions of, I mean, infinite dimensions of perception. And so that's why, yeah, we're perceiving this. And I'm starting to see what this psychedelic experience is, because I mean, yeah, and I'll get back to now to what the difference between weed and mushrooms. But weed kind of lets you think about it. It kind of gets your mind to wrap around it. But then what's interesting is that is also a phase dimensionality. It's a pattern within the potentiality. It's a pattern. Basically, it's every pattern is expressing itself and experimenting itself into the field. as a question and as an absolute. You see what I mean? It is because it is the question that is asked. That is why the answer is given. The answer exists because it is the question. Because that's, yeah, I see. Yeah. That's where the binary dissolves in the singularity. And that's why I keep that's why I keep getting to that point of this thought. And then coming back to the thought pattern of, well, okay, now I just talked about weed again, but my mind took me to that point of highest complexity to grasp it again. And then recursively, there are so many patterns occurring. The world, the U.S. is functioning well enough for me to be here right now. My personal, my social life, my health, all these different dimensions of concrescence, of eventuation, of assumptive obviousnesses, they emerge as a result of the interference with the consciousness, which is it's the singulation, it's the point of, it's the abyss, and it is the sun, it's like the 0 and the 1. It is the collapse point. That is what consciousness is. It's the collapse point and the future projection of how that pattern collapses the potentiality is based on the assumptive pattern, which that phase space pattern, the self, the complex, is projecting into the field. And so we're manipulating essentially this very fine dimension, a very subtle dimension of the field for the most part. Like when we are choosing things for our lives, or operating about what we have. That's why assumption is what creates, because if you assume it is essentially, that's essentially the summation of what the assumption of the wave of the phase of the wave phase space, the self, the complex, at that point of highest complexity, which is the conscious emittance, emergence, invergence, convergence. That's the thing, is it's happening. I get that so much now about that. It's this way, it is this way and that way. And that is a very complex thing to express with language. I see how you can experience things from a higher dimension. I see why people express it as being dimensions, because you are observing you're kind of observing the foremost evidence of the subtlest disruption in the phase space through which the patterns then collapse into these they collapse. But it makes sense, and that's why there's so many things that persist, that are sustained, because they are sustained in consciousness. Because the incumbent of the obvious nextness is what we eventuate into as a natural cresting of these particular dimensions of disruption in the phase space. I mean, honestly, though, it makes perfect sense to me. And I know that. And what's funny too, as much as I'm talking like I'm seeing it, I also am equally aware that I can't even perceive it all. Like I see how little I'm being. This sounds like a lot because I'm perceiving a lot, but I'm also so aware that this is just that it's, and it's almost like your consciousness has to flux between that 0 and 1 point where you can be at that crest, but that is the experience itself. And then you can be on the concrescent point, which is, it depends on which layer of analysis you want to look at it, because the causality of the physical dimension of phase space, if you want to call it that, it just sounds so silly to separate it into things that like we categorize. I get why people say this stuff, because sure, it is that, right? Like it is a different category. That category exists, but it also doesn't show you the proper concepts. Are very difficult to. They're kind of poetic the way they interface with consciousness. They're poetic because of the way that they analogize to the mind. I don't remember what I was going. I don't remember what I was getting at there. Yeah, it's just the reason that things occur into themselves is because that's why it feels like it's sustained, because it is to this point the furthest most. I don't even know. It is the ultimate point, the ultima occurrence. It is the inflection, the convergence. It's the point of most disruption, and then that's why it can interface with itself in general, because the frequencies become so minute in that phase space. That's why it's occurring sort of from this point of perception, if you want to call it that, like that. But this is just this the perception of the potential what is this word I'm trying to create? The potentiality. I know like the words that I'm bouncing between, but I'm looking for a word in between like potentiality and persuasion, actually, which is like, it's almost like persuasion is to imply a certain void energy which creates collapse of the order of the higher complexity system. The order is the point of highest complexity. Chaos is the absence of complexity. And order by its nature is collapsing on chaos. But the chaos cannot be, it can't be, it's not an if then, because they're simultaneous. And so if then becomes the emergence of the impossibility and the possibility of the paradox. Paradox itself is the primary, that's like the prima materia. It must be so. That's why we talk about that's why we even view things on the polarities of belief versus skepticism, because skepticism is the void, is the awareness, is it's the way, the phase spaces assumption. That's the thing, is when you get to this point where you realize that the experience and the way that reality, even reality is such a bad, you just realize, you just see how it's that, that's why it's like the impossibility, the paradox generates somethingness. Because for nothingness to be just doesn't make sense. And I know that sounds like, I'm using like my mind to kind of create a lack of order, but the perception of my mind to look at the the skepticism is it's the perception, it's the likelihood of when it's passing through consciousness. I see, though, it's so complicated to express, because truly it's like you just see what is going on. You just see what's going on. I didn't even take it that much. I'm not really even like tripping. I'm just kind of like having things. I'm revelating. You know what I mean? Like I am becoming aware of these things in the moment that I'm expressing them. And what's kind of crazy about that is the expression of that foremost emergent assumption eventuating into concrescence. That experience is like I am through that's why synchronicity exists, because for right now, even with this video, I am synchronizing this experience into something which is taking physical form. And that's why